My favorite and most inexpensive tool for sewing in the classroom are plastic needles. You can buy them by the dozens for not a lot of money. If you would like to use some yarn, make sure it's nice strong yarn that you'll be using. If you can pull it apart like that, yeah, it's not going to be for sewing. It'll be very frustrating. I'm going to give this blue one the test too. This is nice and strong. So let me show you how I have younger children thread these needles. This pink piece of oak tag is a needle threader. With young children, I actually call it a hot dog bun. And that is because you want to lay the tip of your yarn in it like a hot dog. Make sure it stays in there. You don't want your yummy hot dog to get lost anyplace. And the whole needle threader goes right through the big eye of the needle. I find it's great to have young children practice this so that any time their needle becomes unthreaded, they'll know exactly what to do. Older students can fold the yarn in half over the needle and take that fold and push it right through the big eye. A lot of students that I have worked with really want to tie the needle onto the yarn or the thread, but I discourage that. They should be able to hold the base of the needle with the yarn or the thread as they're sewing, and then it won't come off. Now here's a little tip that a student taught me. The student really didn't like using the plastic needle. It just was not working for them. So they went over to the masking tape, they got a piece, and they made their own lace end on the end of the yarn. It was brilliant. It really was. So now I always suggest that if a student really doesn't want to use the needle and they really don't need it to get through whatever fabric they're using. Of course, any kind of tape will do, whatever works for that artist. You can also use ribbon as your thread. Thin ribbons will fit right through the needle. These small plastic needles are great for loosely woven fabrics, or fabric with holes. This is a piece of a decorative shower curtain, great for sewing on. Make sure that you ask your families for donations. I got bags and bags of lace from a family, and of course it has holes in it, so you could sew through it with these needles. Here I'm showing how you could make a knot in the end of the yarn if you'd like, but it's not necessary. I've had students just leave the end hanging, or they just add a little piece of tape on the end. All ages can certainly use those plastic needles, but there comes a time where you really want to be able to use a metal needle and go through fabric. I like using crewel or embroidery needles or these yarn darners. They are sharp, but they have really big eyes, which help when threading the needle. You could use regular sewing thread, which is kind of thin, or maybe some button thread, which is a little bit thicker. But I do like using this crochet thread that I actually had donated to my art room. It's a lot thicker and it's colorful. So it really adds a lot to the students' projects and they're excited to use it. I also got donations of embroidery thread. One problem I find with younger students and embroidery thread is that it's designed to be separated, so it frays a lot. It can make the needle harder to thread. I have found that the crochet thread stays together much better and isn't as frustrating to thread needles. When threading needles, have a little container of water nearby so you can wet the tip and then thread your needle. Students will need to practice. I have students practice threading metal needles, 2nd grade and up. Of course, this depends on their skill level. You might be wondering about these little metal needle threaders. Well, I have tried them myself and with some students. You just put your thread right through that metal loop, but I've had experience where the children have been a little enthusiastic with them and the little metal part comes off. Let's make a knot at the end of this thread. So I wet my finger, I wrap the thread around to make an X and then roll it off my finger, and voila, there is a knot. Now, if you've never done this before, it will take some practice. And I've had kids practice and practice and practice. I'll, of course, make the knot for them after a couple times, but they need the muscle memory, so they need to actually do it so that they'll be able to do it themselves. Give them time to practice. The first stitch I'll be showing you is the running stitch. Just put your needle through the fabric and come back up next to it and go back down, and that's it. It's great for decorative stitching or for stitching 2 pieces of fabric together. This stitch is the Overcast Stitch. I'm holding 2 edges of the fabric together. I've made a knot, but a student could use a piece of tape. And the Overcast stitch, you actually go over the side of the fabric and pull it. And then make your next stitch going in from the back, pulling towards the front. This is great as a decorative stitch, or if you're going to make and stuff a little pillow or a little creature. The next stitch is the back stitch. Start with a single straight stitch and then come up over to the right and then go backwards almost to where that first stitch came out. And you repeat this by going to the right, pulling through, and going in right next to the end of the other stitch. It makes a very durable stitch, and it can also make some nice decorative lines on your fabric. Before I show you the blanket stitch, let's go over that knot tying again. So wet the end of your yarn, make an X, roll it off of your finger, and then pull, and there's your knot. Go through my fabric. I'm going to do 2 layers for the blanket stitch. You make a loop, then take your needle, put it through the loop, and pull. Go through both layers of fabric again, go through that loop and pull. And you may have seen the blanket stitch on the edge of a blanket. It's decorative and strong. The next stitch is a fancy stitch. It's called a French knot. I pulled my yarn through the fabric. I'm going to wrap it 3 or 4 times around my needle and then push it through to the back, and it makes this cute little 3D knot. Let's do that again. Pull my needle through, take the tip of the needle and wrap 3 or 4 times around the needle, and then poke it through almost where I came through, right near it, and it makes the cute little French knot. Let's sew some buttons, but first let's do that knot again. Wet your finger, wrap it around, make an X, roll the yarn down, pull it, and you've got a knot. Okay, let's just come up through this fabric and get a button, one with holes in it. I'm going to come up through the hole and go down through the other hole. And you can sew a few times because this is some yarn. It's pretty thick, so I'll just go through twice. And then I'm going to make a knot on the back by making a loop and then putting my needle through it once, twice, and then pulling tight and giving it a snip. Let's sew on a button that has a shank instead of holes. So I'll go through again. I already had the knot on, and I'm going to go through the shank of this button and then back down through the fabric. And again, because this is yarn and not thread, I could go through a few more times if I needed to, but let's just pull this through and we'll just tie a couple of knots in the back. So that is another way that you could secure a button on.